There's no such thing as it's not my job. So we had these big expansive jobs. We had multi-tool players, right, with a bunch of skills, so that we didn't have to piecemeal out that job. And so there was never any confusion in that accountability, right? The assumption was, boy, if I don't do this, nobody will do it. And that actually led to a good level of community support too, because you might be like, hey, I know a teammate's out, I'm ready to help him or her, right? Knowing that they'll also have my back. So you get that collective mind share. And to me, boy, if there's something that I think is like worth replicating culturally in these customer success and support teams, it's that kind of ethos to subscribe to. And then that consequently eliminates that big, MBA certified, consistent negative that buyers report.
Welcome to Tools for Tech Leaders, a podcast for C-suite executives and tech decision makers who are excited to connect with peers and thought leaders, sharing ideas, frameworks, and tools that resonate and that are useful. I'm your host, Ian Tien, CEO and co-founder of Mattermost, and today we're thrilled to be joined by Pete Oelschlaeger, a customer success executive and an advisor to high-growth startups who has led customer success globally at Tanium, Contrast Security, and Big ID. Pete recently joined Ambient AI as the SVP of Customer Success and is on a mission to revolutionize physical safety and security. Pete, it's such a pleasure to have you join us today.
Ian, thank you for having me. Look forward to spending a bit of time with you and our listeners.
Yeah, thank you. So, a lot of folks are C-suites or execs or aspirational execs. And in that context, I'd love to hear about sort of your journey and, how did you get to where you are today as an executive, growing up from earlier career?
I always like to tell people I've had 3 acts to my professional arc. The first was just growing up a computer kid. I think I was like 4 or 5 when we had that first computer at home, and I was kind of hooked from the get-go. Programmed from a very early age, did some very nerdy things, still played sports, had friends, all the usual stuff. But I knew I'd study computer science and computer engineering once I got into school. I did those things. I worked in the .coms. I was a software engineer. All that was great. Then Act 2 started, cybersecurity. My first stint in cybersecurity was 10 years at the Sandia National Laboratories to be specific, which is like Los Alamos Laboratories that everybody knows from Oppenheimer, just, doesn't have a movie about it. And at Sandia, I really learned here, it's like the mission is so critically important to me. We're doing, as Sandia's motto went, exceptional service in the national interest. And I had the good fortune to say, hey, I was pretty good behind the keyboard, but my leadership recognized and said, hey, we should start flinging Pete over to the East Coast and Washington, D.C. and going and talk with some of our sponsors about, the types of problems that we're solving and how we might fund the research into those problems. So that kind of gave rise to, over a decade ago, a few of my colleagues from Sandia went to a company called Ambient. They said, Pete, we think you'd really enjoy this. Like the pace is different. We're on the front lines against nation state actors. I said, well, of course I'll take the call. And I joined Ambient shortly after, returned to the commercial world and the private sector and just kind of fell in love with it. I love the pace of startups. I love the low coefficient of friction. The work, the mission was still there. It was just amazing to be like, wow, we're actually like the watchers on the wall against really sophisticated nation state attacks. And, from there, I've just sort of followed my nose, Ian. It was just like, I look for great technologies. I look for really, crazy problems. I remember when I went to Tanium next, I'm like, this is a game changer. Everybody will be using this. And that's just like, now where I am now at Ambient, I was like, wow, physical security, this is so amazingly important to all of us as humans. In 10 years, whether we win the market or not, everybody will look at physical security in a way that they'll say, I can't believe they weren't doing it like this, with AI, analyzed video streams and proactive security measures and so on and so forth. The second part of your question, Ian, was getting into the executive ranks. I think that's just saying yes to everything, if I'm being honest, right? This is I always laugh when I'm on Glassdoor, and you'll see, like, for any like startup, the con will always be like lots of growing challenges, like not much like training. It's like, of course, that's what makes it wonderful. You get to go carve that future, you know. And so you start to learn like what your strengths are. You say yes to a lot of stuff. Guess what? Startups, you always have more challenges and you have talented people to solve them. I just said yes to everyone that was thrown my way. You have to work real hard at that. And then the human elements of thinking that, hey, I'm helping people do what they want to do in life is incredibly fulfilling to me in roles like this.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's lots of parts to sort of double click on that journey. And one thing that I was kind of drawn to as you're speaking is your time at Sandia and working on national security and how that kind of fit. It was a foundation for the things you did. A lot of the folks that we work at Mattermost are coming from, national security, or we serve national security, backgrounds. We've hired a lot of folks in the commercial space. We want to hire more people from that national security space, from defense, from critical infrastructure. And I'm kind of curious, like, what advice might you have for how to attract like the next Pete O into a company like Mattermost? Like, how would you approach like national labs, national security, cyber defense, all those, is there like, are you on a WhatsApp group with everybody? Like, is it conferences? Like, what are the ways to kind of attract, that tier of talent?
So it's a fantastic question. Here's how I'd approach this. Let's think about like attributes of people, characteristics that would lead an individual person to say, oh, I want to go, left or right, accept this job or that job. Certainly this was true at Sandia. And I think it's mostly true, even though I can't speak quite as authentically in some of the other sectors you mentioned, because, things are different. But folks who were in my groups were invigorated by two things. One, there was a very, very strong sense of mission, right? I think pound for pound for the exact same job, inside or outside of, say, the national lab systems or the federal sector, you can make more money in the commercial space. Okay. The second one, though, is that you got to work on really, really hard challenges, and you got to do that within a really solid culture that allowed you to go and pursue those hard challenges. That was certainly true at the labs. And so when we think about, and I think about this even in building my own team too, I go, what's the mission? How is that going to resonate with people, right? How can I advertise that in a way? How can I incorporate that in my interview process? And then second, the kind of negative that I mentioned, right, in terms of these compensation differentials, that's leverage too, right? To say, hey, your sense of mission can be just as strong. Some of the cultural things that you really enjoyed can be replicated. And then the third thing is, hey, you're going to have different opportunities in your career path to earn more, to explore more, et cetera, right? Taking those fungible skills into the commercial sector.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what was it like to transition from Sandia into like commercial?
Yeah. So I remember those days. First of all, it wasn't my first rodeo exactly in the private sector, but it had been a while, right? Nearly a decade within the national lab space. The very first thing that I just said, oh my God, I'm so happy, was that reaffirmation of the mission, right? Because you go from like service in the national interest to like, oh my God, like we're actually investigating intrusions and attributing these to nation state actors, right? Like it's a live fire exercise that you're doing. So it held that bar very high. The second one though is I found like let's be honest, there's a bit more bureaucracy in government sectors quite often. Certainly true in my world. And the private sector, you're really incentivized to go and do. So I remember that, as I remember even talking to Kevin Mandia and Travis Reese, the CEO and president of Mandiant at the time, and saying, "Oh my guys, guys, I am so happy here. The coefficient of friction is basically zero. So all of those hard hours that you put into a startup, you recognize as being so productive, that was always my happy place, right? Like having the capacity to work is great so long as you get to see all of your effort turning into something that's gold. If it's not, then you go, I'm the type of person that would just almost rather not do it and become very lazy otherwise to say, oh, gee, there's all this bureaucracy in the way.
Yeah, excellent. That totally makes sense. Very resonates a lot, that coefficient of friction and doing what you kind of love and seeing that impact. When you think about your role in customer success and that leadership, the conversation we had earlier is that sometimes like everyone thinks in different functions they understand the customer or they're customer centric. But what I found in our company is we have fantastic leaders. They're very customer centric in their function. So product is like, what will the source code do for the customer, right? And professional services, like what will my project, how will that impact the customer? And there's not, a sort of a holistic 360 view, and it's almost impossible to actually create one because everyone is in their own context. And how do you think about developing that customer centricity when everyone's got sort of different views and is in the context of what they're doing day to day?
Yeah. I think this is such a critical insight for you to share here, Ian. And it's funny, as I listen to you, I think there's even some good things that you've stumbled upon here in asking me the question. For example, you're saying, hey, everybody, if everybody's thinking about customers and that customer experience in each of their respective functions, I look at that and I say, that's great. That's often the hard part of the problem. And I'll explain why in just a minute. The second part of your question is, how do you start to unify that for a compound effect, right? Because everybody will say, believe me, like if there's anything that I've started to hold true, it's that everybody will say, I'm a data-driven person and we're a data-driven organization, despite mostly trading in opinions. And the second one, we're customer-centric, despite making lots of decisions that have nothing to do with any sort of reflection towards the customer experience. So let's talk through some concepts. The first one is to have these unifying precepts that you can embed in a company. We've talked previously about the power of a concept called outside in. Evaluating everything that every person in your company is doing through the lens of how it is going to shape the customer experience. And people will often challenge this and say, oh, it makes sense from like a customer success viewpoint or sales viewpoint or product viewpoint, but even stuff that you might consider back office has a role to play in looking at things outside in. For example, if you have a lot of technical complexity in your product, or maintaining a sense of the customer's context is a critical component of your ability to deliver, HR better bring it on creating fantastic programs that are going to retain high performers and critical people at a rate that exceeds an industry average. So these concepts, whether that's outside in or something else, this has to be, consistently modeled from the C-suite all the way down to, every individual performer, and examples and challenges in these, meetings and reviews about, are we actually doing that? Or are we just giving ourselves lip service? A second component and often missed is even having defining a strategy. I think that's a whole separate podcast about defining strategies and so on, but you'll see a lot of strategy that, when it's written down on paper, it sort of relegates the customer stuff to a mission statement, right? That makes us feel good. And then talks about like introducing cost efficiencies and all of these other components that, may be great for investors and the board and shareholders, et cetera. Don't channel that reflection. Thoughts on any of that, Ian? Or should we go for more? I've got plenty to say on this topic.
No, I love it. I think we just actually came from one of our leadership offsites, and we did our sort of strategy piece as you're discussing. And I think you're 100% right. Like you've got that top level frame about customers, and it's like, well, does the rest of it sort of fit? So what I've actually been starting to do is we start taking screenshots of like our strategy, and we actually ask like one of the LLMs, it's like, explain the strategy, and like what comes out might not be what we think it is, and therefore we actually have to change some of the words so that it lands sort of the right way. And I think you're totally right in terms of, it's like, and I've tried for quite a while to get people to be more customer centric. I think the advantage I have as CEO is I can move across the departments, right? And I can connect the dots. And what happens is like things fall through the cracks and people don't realize that they're falling because it's not their job. Like sometimes the success of the customer is the success of the customer in the context of their job only. And if it's outside their job, their brain is just like delete, like they can't fathom it. So a very concrete example, someone came up to me and they're like, did you know that our accounts receivable department receives like dozens and dozens of technical support requests? And they have to like manually, the accounts receivable department, like walk it over to support and be like, it's forwarding, but like you have to like walk over and give the customer support people the ticket. And no one's solving this, right? Like, and someone sort of discovered it and they're like, wait, this happened? How many times has it happened? Dozens and dozens of times? Oh, crap. And then this person went to the marketing department and they found out there was an SEO issue, right? The billing department showed up higher in the search results when you're trying to solve a problem with Mattermost. So we actually had the marketing team SEO it the other way so that customer support would show up earlier. So whose job is that? Right? Like you say you're customer centric, but whose job is that? And I think one thing that, so there's this book outside in that you and I discussed before, that's a Forrester framework for how to think about customers. And in that book, there's a little example, which is like, well, in one of the case studies, have a director of customer experience, right? Influence without authority. Like they're the catalyst for customer centricity. So when you have the accounts receivable department getting these tickets, right? It's the director of customer experience and maybe a small organization that's sort of connecting the dots and catalyzing these changes. Because if they don't, there's really nothing else because everyone's so focused on their KPIs and their metrics, shockingly, like they can't orient towards the customer because they're too busy serving, this particular function for the customer.
That's right. And, the symptom to look out for there, right? If there's somebody who's thinking like, well, what's my company? Are we customer centric or are we just pretending to be one on TV? It's like when different functions within your organization start to just move pressure around, like you might move pressure like mashed potatoes on a plate, right? That is customer centric in name only. When you start to trade in stories, right, and talk about the same story, hey, how can we each enhance this story, right? When you see a product team who's not just talking about, oh, we've got a new release and here's some features, and then put pressure on a CS team to be like, now we need customers, to use this, right? That's almost like force feeding. You instead would say, hey, a CS team has already gotten a list of customers who are all wrestling with the same problem, right? And then product and engineering can go crunch on that and say, well, here's our proposed solution, right? And they're engaged and talking to the customers, et cetera. So now it's a very natural flow that, of course, that same cohort of customers would be very receptive to say, we're going to be, we'd love to receive this in beta form so we can keep refining it, right? And you actually get that truth test of, did we holistically, solve that experiential problem? Another thing to throw out there, it's been making the rounds lately, was this survey. I think Bain did it. And I'll paraphrase here, but it's basically like, what do people, or what do customers in the SaaS business, expect from their customer success departments? And they surveyed both people, like say, customer success professionals, and then they surveyed buyers in here. And once again, don't quote me on this, but I remember the punchline, right? Like what customer success people think they want is, like the trusted advocate, like the guide along the way. Yes, there's some service and support, et cetera. Connecting with these business objectives and outcomes, et cetera. That ended up on the buyer's side of the survey too. But the number one thing is like, we need somebody to fix our stuff, right? Like solve problems for us, So to me, I think we're really seeing this realignment now in the economy and in the shape of some of these jobs that is almost naturally saying, hey, CS organizations, they don't have the budget to do just kind of everything under the sun, right? And have people that are kind of slinging PowerPoints around and sharing best practices, et cetera. Like, we've got to put people together that are like there in the customer's immediate need. You earn trust that way. And then also, guess what? You're going to get those stories that I've just asserted are so vital to share across a company and start to unify teams on that common purpose.
Yeah, 100%. We had this, we had those. It's funny, at business school, they teach you how to use like Post-it notes to do like executive team meetings. So we like had one of those Post-it note meetings.
Yeah.
And it's like, what metrics really matter? And you put all the metrics up and it's like, okay, vote on them. What's actually most important? And there's two metrics that really was about customer happiness. One was evangelism and referrals, right? Like that's one. How many are actually standing up and sing your praises? The other one was, consumption metric, obvious, right? Like, how many, what's the consumption like? We sell licensed seats, so it's like seats deployed. So those make sense. On the negative end, it was two really clear ones. It was long-running support tickets, right? That was like a very highly negative sign. And the other one was, and so many people cared about this, it was like saying you're going to do something and then not doing it, right? That sort of follow-up. It was like, and so many head nods, so many other people. It was really just sort of eye-opening. And we actually asked people, on the customer orientation, but also like we just asked a whole bunch of executives, how do they think about their vendors? Right. So if like you say you're something, you set the expectation and you don't do it, like you're like dead to them and they just want to like move on to the next product.
Exactly. What's the point, right? And it's great because as human beings, when we step out of our software builders and peddler skins, right? We've all had those experiences, right? Every human being has felt great customer service experiences and very poor ones, and follow through and closure. And being able to solve an arbitrary set of things with competency and with empathy is vital if you're really going to win that game. You're sparking, some of my thoughts about that kind of lack of accountability here, right? That can be pervasive, and this comes up naturally with fast scaling companies. It's very easy to fall into this mistake because you're bringing in new people, the people have ideas, people are saying, oh, we need this job and this job and this job and so on. And on paper, it all looks like a very, very well-oiled machine. But everybody's still in the storming phase, right? They're new, they're invigorated, they're great. They think they're going to do the job, but it can get confusing. And that's just human nature. And startups, you don't really have there's no good footprints to stand in to be like, okay, cool. We're already in a really good spot. This is an optimality problem. You're solving a very fundamental problem of customer counts going up like this, revenues going up like this, and you're just trying to get things to stick and keep the roof up. I'm mixing metaphors here. Bear with me. I go back to Tanium, which was a very, very a high growth, successful company, and the founders and the initial leaders had this exactly right. And in the culture we embedded, there's no such thing as it's not my job. So we had these big expansive jobs. We had multi-tool players, right, with a bunch of skills, so that we didn't have to piecemeal out that job. And so there was never any confusion in that accountability, right? The assumption was, boy, if I don't do this, nobody will do it. And that actually led to a good level of community support too, because you might be like, hey, I know a teammate's out. I'm ready to help him or her, right? Knowing that they'll also have my back. So you get that collective mind share. And to me, boy, if there's something that I think is like worth replicating culturally in these customer success and support teams, it's that kind of ethos to subscribe to. And then that consequently eliminates that big, MBA certified, consistent negative that buyers report.
Yeah, 100%. And it's something we talked about before, this concept of multi-tool players, and I'd love to double click on that. When you're in customer success and when you're customer success, and I'd love to learn about, hey, you're in security, you're in national security, you've got a customer success person on the other side, you as the customer, how do you think about that interaction? And you as the leader of that organization, what do you look for? Multi-tool player, what does that mean? How do you hire from it? How do you train it? Like, how do you deploy it?
Yeah. Well, I remember, big financial institutions, big banks have consistently been customers of mine. And if there's something that the chief information security officer wants to know consistently, it's, well, how's everybody else doing it, right? What are we not doing that will actually help us achieve a stronger outcome, either in spite of or because of your goods and services there? And that first tool, it's almost strange to call it that, Ian, but the domain experience, people, the best customer success people, and I'm using that term purposely very, very broadly, right? But front lines, where the action is, customer has bought software and a promise. How do you fulfill that? No matter what your actual job is called and what you say about it on LinkedIn, right? Customers, the best customer success people are both knowledgeable and passionate about the domain. And then a second component is, and this will vary like on a slidey bar based on the technical complexity of the solution, right? But for like technically complex or ones that have a long deployment time, or going to be operating in heterogeneous environments, et cetera, like there, the more technical aptitude somebody has, it's absolutely vital, right? Otherwise, you start to get into the situations where, hey, the person you've got on the front lines that might actually know some things about the domain, anytime something goes blip, it's like, well, we've got to file a support ticket. I got to go get somebody else, et cetera. And we're back to the Bain survey, right? That's not what customers want first order in their customer experience, right? And then third is I look at the consulting aptitude as well, right, as another one of these vital things. So there's a bunch of teams where when I think, okay, we've got to scale this up rapidly, how do we get a big labor pool? You look for people that have actually done consulting jobs, Big Four, boutique, doesn't matter, right? But you have to start operating in the sense of, I've got to ask a lot of questions. I've got to make sure that I'm identifying like the problem larger than ourselves here. Meaning it's not just about the technology working, it's about something actually changing for the better. You do that part right, everything else, renewals, upsells, et cetera, that starts taking care of itself. So you get that consulting acumen in there. That's great. And boy, bonus points if you can sprinkle a little bit of the sales aptitude as well, right? I always think people like to laugh at sales, but yet it is one of the most vital, fungible skills any human being can have cross context. So you start to get that, the domain, enough technical aptitude to be useful in a lot of different situations, the consulting foo, which can include project management and so on and so forth, and the sales acumen. You put that together and wow, that is a person who will never suffer from job prospects.
Yeah, 100%. And then how do you think about hiring them? Do you just kind of find people who have done CS with those backgrounds? Do you hire people who are in those backgrounds? You train them to CS?
Yeah. There's a lot of ways I could answer this question, Ian. Let me tell you a story. This is just one of the little micro chapters in my career where we'd run an experiment to hire, some customer success managers. And we hired sort of the first 10 over the span of, say, 6-7 months. And the experiment went well. So all of a sudden there was a mandate to have 80 more of them across the globe in like 3 or 4 months. I mean, we're talking like a velocity change rate that none of us had any sort of experience in, right? This is sort of a new frontier. And I remember like feverishly doing some math back of the napkin to even think about what our interview process was going to look like and how many FTEs that would consume, right? When we added up all the different time and getting almost militant, like our recruiting software at that time was called Greenhouse, right? So going in and saying, hey, what's the data tell me? What are our funnel flow through rates? How do we start to optimize that? But I think this will really connect with one of our earlier comments about unifying teams. I remember the very next thing that I did was get on a plane to go take our recruiters who were going to be dedicated to this out to dinner in the Bay Area, And I remember talking to everybody and saying, you all, intrepid people, are just as much a part of my team as anybody else that sits under that in the org chart, right? I mean, you make that joint to say, without you, right? Person with disparate function. We will never obtain our goal here. And I said, also, just as an aside, we're going to do this in a way where we actually get a very diverse team. And I didn't mean that just on race and gender, but like backgrounds. We weren't going to all get from the same pool. And we ended up with kind of all of the above, right? So breakneck pace, nice wide array of domains that, and I remember the reason that I was thinking we're going to go for this diversity as well is because I said, man, I could take like the best 2 or 3 people and just look for their clones, right? Where we're just like LinkedIn recruitering and searching for the same pedigrees. And I go, super if the problem set stays exactly the same, right? Like if all my customers need just more of that, perfect. But I won't have the ability to start thinking, and this is so intrinsic to startups, like how are we going to solve with that same team unanticipated challenges, which invariably will arise. So that's kind of like the philosophy and the spirit behind all of it and some of the tactics. And then the others are like, you do have to start casting a pretty wide net. So some of those others, let's just, run down the tactics. It was like, even a more recent team that I hired, right? I said, hey, let's look at people who have done 2-3 years in Big 4 consulting firms, right? All the filters exist online that you can do that. A second one that a lot of people don't take advantage of is get your hiring managers, especially if your company does not have a significant profile, do the outreach yourself, right? Be very honest about what you're looking for and the type of opportunity that you can provide. It's astonishing what the response rate on a platform like LinkedIn is when you make that kind of direct outreach. And then the third is like, in your interview process, share as much as possible about your world. That might be access to the software, some case studies to examine and then present back, et cetera. That is such a great way to actually draw people in. I think the intuitive thing is like, oh, that'll create too much work and scare people off, et cetera. But instead, if you're able to kind of give people a test drive, what a wonderful way to mutually signal to one another that you are in fact passionate about it and care and drawn to the problem set that your company's attempting to solve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And I think it's something that we maybe don't do enough of, which is I think folks that come from big companies are a little bit like, well, I'm from Microsoft. Like recruiters will bring me a plate of like amazing, highly filtered people, filter harder.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is like, if you can teach your managers to spearfish, right? It's just so much more powerful. It's one of these forever skills for managers.
Yeah,
I'd love to talk. Yeah. So it sounds like you could take
something
from consulting,
like something that's really bad from a cybersecurity perspective is now a good thing for going and turning humans into employees. Love it.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, it's got to be harder to hire cyber people because it looks like you're phishing them all the time. They're like, "Who are you?"
Yeah, that's right. Are you a bot now? And exactly. Who do you work for?
It's funny because we're in the cyberspace, I guess. So it's like, one of the attacks you have on banks is actually send malware through the PDFs to the cyber team. So that's like a whole different vector.
That's been around for a long, long time. The old weaponized PDF, indeed. Some of the best IRs. I mean, best from a like effective attack vector and the speed at which attackers were able to penetrate a network and then start doing start dwelling. That's a fast path to get there. That was, at least.
I love talking to red team people. They're so fun. They're like, after I breach their system, I get in the conf call where they're trying to find me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can. It's a great job. If you've got the mind for it, that's a really, really fun job.
Yeah. So just kind of going back to the multi-tool player, I love this sort of concept. Could you kind of expand on what you mean by multi-tool player for the CS role, especially with security and sort of national security customers?
Yeah, I hope I can. I think that let me channel some of the advice I remember getting from a very, very prominent venture capitalist who said, and board member of one of the companies. He goes, "Stay as flat as possible for as long as possible until it drives you crazy. Then change something up, add a layer, what have you, rinse, repeat." And all of that, like that. So one, that sounded really cool at the time. we followed it to a T as we scaled up, big, like broke all of these, like immutable laws of managerial physics, like number of direct reports and stuff. It's like, no, if you're hiring multi-tool, like highly skilled people that really know the domain at a senior level, like you don't have to do a one-on-one every, week to make everybody feel really good, and keep guiding them on their career. So we would have teams of this, with like 20, 25, with a single manager, and it worked really, really well. So pros and cons to every decision, but that was categorically an outstanding pro to be able to do that. But that concept, I'll double down about what I talked about. Still solving for a diverse set of problems. Okay, and here's even where we could drift a little bit from the customer experience. What does a multi-tool player give you? One is in almost like a work that I don't want to call it passive, because passive sounds like such a bad word. It's a very active way, but you're getting somebody that, yes, is doing a job for a customer, but has the knowledge and then therefore a little bit of the confidence, okay, to then say, hey, you know what? Boy, in the last 2 weeks, I've had a lot of conversations with my customers who are in, say, the national security domain. Here's a little wrinkle to the problem that they've had, right? Something new. And we'll go out and actually like create that joint with with product or engineering or the CEO of the company. Maybe they got to go get you, Ian, and say, hey, like, this isn't just like oh my God, I'm stuck, and so when I'm stuck, I need to just bring in product because we're toast, but rather like, I see a way that we could potentially make this better. And that person typically also has the wherewithal, very common one that people in tech product business feel is like, how do you handle feature enhancement requests from customers, which just by the law of averages, like some are going to be really terrible and directionally opposed with where you're trying to take the company and grow, and others may be amazing, right? And what rookies do is they kind of go like, oh, it's an idea from a customer, and boy, it'll they'll feel better about us if we give it the time of day, right? Multi-tool player takes that and says, oh, we're back into the consulting arm, right? Like, why do you feel that way? What problem are you trying to solve, right? Let's establish some of these things. So now I can go have a richer conversation and help, provide you the best experience with our company interacting with others, say the builders. So that is like the, I'm not going to expect a person who's hired to do level 1 support engineering to have that kind of high-minded conversation as they respond to a customer. That's not to say level 1 support is bad by any means, but that's not what we're talking about with a multi-tool player and what you get when there's that situational awareness and the bevy of tools we talked about.
Yeah, I totally love that. So what I heard you say is like, hey, you're looking for customer success, multi-tool players that can not only do multiple roles, but that sort of, consulting foo, that understanding the question behind the question, digging, getting discovery, and understanding what is the broader problem to be solved. Like, you're coming in and you're using our tool, but what that is one in a component of other things that you need to get done in order for you to be a sort of full success. Did I get that right?
Right. You did. And another element of this too, and hey, I think there's probably exceptions to this, but when I think of the best people that I've had the good fortune to work with, in this arena, almost universally, they give a damn, and they don't just give a damn for their own company's purpose. They're saying, is the customer getting what they paid for, right? Are they, is their business in the broadest sense of the word, is it actually changing, And so then they start to say, well, I'll bring the whole armada if I have to solve this problem. And that's so different, because there's plenty of other people that will say, now we're back into the whole like, oh, I think that should be somebody else's job kind of thing, right? Or I will delegate that, I'll hand off that entire conversation and problem to some other function within my organization. So, as leaders start to bias towards that when they're thinking, okay, hey, I've got to make some choices about sets of people that I'm going to bring in. Oh, and let's go ahead and make this even more complicated. We're going to use it to unify a company culture around these customer-centric concepts, right? Like this is a lever to do that. Get more of this in your field operation, more of these multi-tool players, more of these people who care passionately about the domain. And if a customer is not making progress, and then have the aptitudes to say, yep, I know how to activate my company to respond and push in meaningful ways.
Yeah, completely love that. I love that. That sort of that leader, that customer success person that's sort of behind enemy lines, right? That is on the customer side, that sees things from their perspective, because that's what you really need to orient the full company to solve all the problems.
Right. Although you bring up a good point. I've seen people overcook this too, right? Where they've said, hey, it's my customer, and they've got a great relationship. They've been working together for 2 years, and they start skipping over the critical thought, right? Being this joint in the system that's required to have a critical thought, right? Where it's like, oh, a customer got stuck in a particular way, or they had an idea. So I'm now elevating and being really noisy within my company without putting my own critical thought, or, setting aside my consultative abilities for a moment, right? So a little bit of a cautionary tale. I think it's pretty rare, but I've seen that a couple times. And then that just ends up wasting time. Ultimately, right? It starts to create a latent overpromise for customers, and then just chews up a bunch of time for others that are then activated to go, swarm.
Yeah, 100%. I've seen sort of over servicing. I've seen sort of crying wolf a little bit, and things just aren't sort of calibrated to the right level of sort of. I see things are a little bit sort of mismatched.
Right. On the balance, I think guys like you and me would much rather solve that problem, right, than the opposite.
Yes.
Of not caring enough and not feeling like, it's your problem and that you have the resources and the aptitudes to go do something about. But yeah, it is a thing.
Yeah, it's caring enough, but also caring about the right thing.
Yeah. And, we're kind of back into like, that's on leaders, that's on CEOs, executives, et cetera, to help shape, make it clear over and over and over, like what constitutes the right thing. It's very easy for, just to pick on you, Ian, right? To say, okay, I, CEO and founder of this company, like insist it's so important to go take care of our customers, right? Like, duh. Like, well, we really have a genius CEO. And you might say that with the most vigor. People are like, rah, that's right. How does that help a person make a decision on what that means, right? So as that kind of cascades down through, you start to give people the I don't even want to say guardrails, right? But just these little either concepts or some definitions of like, these are the good things that when any person in the company makes decisions are going to help advance our cause and produce a great customer experience. That could trickle all the way down to tactics and to like how quickly we're going to goal time to first response for support tickets that come in, right? So
yes.
At different levels of your organization, those are going to mean different things, but they should all connect. If you were to feed them back into your LLM, right, and say like, does this make sense? Are they connected? The LLM should be able to spit out and say, well, yep, here's the common theme that's imbued in each of these directions and goals and tactics and so on. So I think that's a super, super important point, Ian.
Yeah, and I'd love to move just the conversations to a little bit towards sort of technical support and technical account management. We talk a lot about customer success.
Yeah.
At our company, we're also thinking about like, hey, how do we make sure everyone's working together? How do you think about that support and technical account management function? I mean, certainly a lot of parallels, servicing at the right level, making sure the right customer is sort of prioritized, the right issues. How would you think about advising or crafting that part of the organization?
Yeah. Okay, so that's a super hard question for me to answer because this is like where my nature of like, well, it depends starts to come up, and I also look at like the mad science of how do we give people titles as like more like kind of an art form, right? Like at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter, and customers don't give a rip what we call ourselves. It's what skills do you have? How do you bring them to bear in my world, me being a customer in this case. So in fairness to the question though, right? Like if we say, okay, TAMs are a little bit more biased towards actually having hard technical skills, and CSMs are a little bit more biased to having a little bit more business acumen, okay? First of all, I think there's a Venn diagram waiting to be scribbled here, right? That says a company has to figure out what that adjustment looks like, and if you obviously have too much overlap, then guess what? You've got one job, you don't have two jobs in there. So quite often, like in a subscription business, people will say, okay, CSMs, there's renewals that, you're much closer to the money that has to happen. You might say, well, do we still just solve that with sales? Or is that something that we've got, CSMs and importantly, if you do that, you need to give CSMs the authority to act. Do not make it a helper function come hell or high water there, right? Where you're just in between everything. You have no formal authority to actually make a company take action towards something. Then the TAM side of it is, and I'll kind of lump TAM support in here just for brevity, right? You're still thinking like, how do we attack the front part of the problem and make sure that a customer is up and running very, very quickly? How do we understand the total ecosystem, their landscape, their tech stack, how things need to be plumbed together, and have that collective wisdom to bring like this is where I always have my teams getting very aggressive on focusing on time to value. So I think there is a lever here, right? That the more technical complexity, the more heterogeneity you're going to have in your customer environments, you need more TAMing, you're going to need more. And the more you have, say, things that are repeatable and consistent, you can get often great cost efficiencies by doing that more with support. So I'm triangulating three things in probably a little bit of an awkward way here, but that's still how my brain functions after all these years about what archetypes, we're looking for, and then how we might compose those in a way that it still looks very unified to a customer. Job number one, there's like the best handoff of all is like no handoff, right? Like, oh, I'm being handed off to something. No, no, just fix it, right? We're back onto that theme. But you've mixed and matched the skills for customers that are, say, different phases and have different needs of their time with you.
Got it. So I'm just kind of thinking about applying this, for our functions, which is you've got sort of a customer success manager who understands the customer's business problem where our solution fits into their broader needs. And so I think, and then you've got maybe the technical account manager that's really focused on time to value. It's like, what do you need from us? How quickly can we deliver that to you? And there's maybe a customer support function, technical support function that's about like mean time to resolve the ticket, right? It's like, okay, there's a problem. Let's go fix that. That doesn't necessarily get us time to value. Maybe we need a consulting services, or maybe we need a missing piece in the middle. But how do I TAM is how do I get you time to value, unlocking like a technical skill set? And it sounds like that the right TAM can kind of do all three, right? If they can speak, if they got some consulting food, they've got.
I think that's. I think there's a trap in that, right? Because ever since the days of Mark Benioff and Salesforce and the coining of the term customer success, right? I mean, we used to just call these things customer service. When you and me were kids, it was called customer service, right? Customer service and sales. There's none of the success stuff in the middle. Now in the subscription economy and so on, and with NDR being an important metric, customer success is vital. But the rookie mistake winds up being like, oh, hey, we're gonna pull out like best practices and revenue and renewals and getting expansions, and we'll just call that customer success. Everybody can see right through that, while saying like, okay, everything else is going to be like offshore support, to just take it to the logical extreme. And those are two very disparate types of models. And by the way, like often they're blended in a very beautiful way. But I'm taking it to the extreme for this example. I think as you grow, like when I see that kind of pure muscle of customer success come true, the idea is that you're a bigger company, right? You are solving a whole bunch of problems. If we think Palo Alto Networks or Salesforce, right? There is so much that that company can provide as a platform. And a customer success manager has to say, wow, I'm really skilled in this domain. And I understand a broad set of the challenges, these larger problems that you may have, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. And let's talk about those. And hey, when you do all of that correctly and you can help show a path to a greater volume of, a greater volume of value that you can provide, the follow-on sales are almost turnkey in that case, right? So that's where hiring that diverse set of CSMs, in my life at Tanium, when we really grew that CSM army, right? It wasn't just cybersecurity specialists. There were people and really knew, had come out of industry doing IT operations, and some of them had done incident response in past lives, and some of them had done vulnerability finding at large corporations, et cetera. And a lot of them had done actually consulting work where you're just trying to say, hey, I'm trying to figure out across these 40 people that we're engaging with in the customer environment, who cares about what are their most pressing business needs, et cetera, and can I help map out a solution that, if we're able to prove it out, will eventuate in great follow-on sales for us. So gives you a way to kind of limber up and get your arms around that increasing set of problems that you and your company can go on and solve. I think that's the true promise of that, CS muscle.
That's totally love that. And when you think about what are as you want to build your CS muscle and all the different functions, and having seen it sort of many times, are there sort of signals where everyone thinks they're doing it the right way, but they're actually doing it the wrong way? What is that sort of unobvious, didn't realize it, kind of look like, if you've seen that before, or is it just so obvious that, everyone knows if they're going the wrong direction?
You kind of mean this question from a internal perspective, like what people are or in terms of reflections from your customers?
Well, one of the things that we've had in the past is like multi-year deals, right? Where it's sort of okay, the metric is, renewals, right? So then the multi-year deal doesn't get sort of enough attention along the way. And, and suddenly the multi-year deals all have all these issues, but people are like, well, that's a multi-year deal. We didn't really service it. So you can't hold us accountable for that.
Yeah, that's the opposite outside in, by the way. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, rookie mistakes are if all you care about is renewal rates and NDR, and you're oh, as long as we achieve that, that's fine. That may get you to be lucky for a little while, but it'll crumble down. So for me, and there's lots written about this. I think it was the guys at Catalyst, which is a customer success platform company, that coined this. So something like, moments of impact, something like that. MOIs, right? You're thinking about producing, because the customer experience, especially over a multi-year deal, right, it looks linear when we look at a calendar. It's totally nonlinear, right? People change, businesses change, training levels change, interactions change. There's a lot is going to happen because of the passage of time in, say, 3 years, right? So your CS program writ large needs to be considering, where are we providing these moments of impact along the way? Then you can actually score that. You can think about, you could timestamp it between moments of impact. Of course, you have to qualify it. You have to define it as a team. But great teams can constantly go on and start generating more and more of these moments of impact. And there's sort of these tools of the trade, right? Like maturity models is one. So I've had several product lines before where the team would say, hey, for each of our products, we're going to kind of map out, we're going to use our own customers as guinea pigs, level 1 through 5, right? Fits right on a page. And then we could take that page to a customer, say, hey, have a look at this. Where would you grade yourself? Where would you like to be 2 years from now? Let's say the contract is 3 years long. Super. All right. You're at level 2. You'd like to go to level 4. You've listed out the attributes. Cool. You're going to work with me and my team, and we're going to, bit by bit, we're going to hold ourselves mutually accountable to go and get you from 2 to 4. We're also going to review if your goals are changing, right? Now we have measurable progress that actually is going to reflect the customer experience, not just be a vanity metric for us to be like, hey, good job, Ian, you made a huge expansion, right? And nobody has any idea why. Nobody has any idea like how that might be replicated along the way in a more systematic way. And we've talked about the power of concepts too, right? I've tried to do this at almost every startup I've been at, is like, what is this durable concept that everybody can get behind? And I think my greatest hit, again, back from the Tanium days, was creating an M-shaped customer. Literally, it's a single letter, right? Like anybody with 2 brain cells can remember a single letter. And if you think about a capital M, right, there are 3 big pillars that come down from that capital M. So some people say, well, there's kind of 4 if you count the 2 in the middle, but we're going with 3, right? 3 times you touch the ground. And the idea was like an M-shaped customer had proven business value in each of those 3 pillars, right? The pillars aligned with our products, et cetera, right? So then we could talk about, hey, a risk is a single threaded, they're only in 1 pillar, right? And maybe 1 buyer there, et cetera. There's naturally a risk that you might be swapped out for something considered best in breed. But if you have a platform strategy, you've gotten wider. And by the way, for anybody listening, this isn't just about, oh my God, you got to have a lot of SKUs, you got to have a lot of pillars, et cetera. Like you could make an M shape out of use cases, out of within an organization, right? Like think very creatively about how you're both, going to widen that footprint, and then you're going to deepen the impact that you're making at a customer. Once again, these are now demonstrable, measurable components that actually truthfully depict on if your whole CS program is worth a hill of beans. The math, the economics sort themselves out. Every time I've done what we're just talking about, right? I've never been like, oh yeah, we did all that right, but like, gross retention was 81% this year, or NDR was like 101%. Like that, those are mutually exclusive.
Yep, 100%. And maybe just double click in there. I completely agree. Like NDR and retention rates, those are lagging indicators. And we talked about sort of like moments of impact, sort of maturity models as some leading indicators. When you're thinking about a dashboard, of course, GRR and NDR you've got on the lagging indicator side. Do you have any favorites, or do you have any perennials? Realize all situations are different, customers are different, but there are any ones that are at the leading edge that you just want to make sure? Is it CSAT score? Is it NPS score? Is it how many EBRs you have?
Oh, yeah, I love that you named those 3, because like I'm a detractor of NPS generally. I think it works great if like you're an airline, if you're Salesforce, if you're Okta, if you have like tens of thousands of customers and a lot of repeatability to your business. I think NPS is likely a really crucial way to get a sentiment. For guys like you and me, where we have customers that say number in the tens or hundreds or maybe even 1,000, right? I still think getting like, once again, understanding, hey, what's the kind of customer experience that we want to consistently drive? How are we going to measure that? And then even openly sharing that back with customers to validate it is important. And the most crucial, to get kind of back to your question here, Ian, is like, this idea of time to value. So I was just making the analogy the other day with some members of my team that like CS people tend to be of all stripes. You're like the Greek Sisyphus, right? Who was condemned to be pushing the rock up over the hill. And then as soon as that rock would start going, the legend of Sisyphus, Sisyphus had to go back down to the bottom and do it all over again. But I digress, right? And a CS journey, I kind of hate the term, but the idea is like, hey, how do we create for the customer getting to the top of that hill, knowing that after that, boom, things are a little bit more straightforward, right? Operations starts to take over. Like thinking about the Mattermost business, right? Like you've got users on the platform, they know how to interact with it. They're starting to get actual real value because of what you're providing. So a team has to sit down and define what is that, and it could be a series of things, but one is best, right? When can we say that is actually happening? Okay, that's sort of top of the hill. And then you declare some impossible future that you're going to do that at a pace where your team goes, that's crazy. We could never do that. Maybe once or 10 times or whatever. Believe me, the whole company starts to rally to make that happen. It's ease of use improvements. It's an investment in training. It's people understanding, gee, this is what it's going to take. I got to start now. So you start seeing that proactivity. And you can always put in like the corrective actions too, like, hey, which customers are at risk of not meeting that milestone that we've said is going to happen in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, whatever the case may be. Then you kind of go back and you say, why isn't this happening? Where do we need to help the team? Where do we need to help the customer, et cetera? So lots of choices in rallying as you've done the work of which may be for some companies as simple as stuff needs to be deployed and users need to be enabled. It really will come down to individual preferences, but that is that like common gear that in all the consulting work that I've done and in companies that I've joined, it's not what people are first thinking about, and for me that's like the very first thing that I'm thinking about always.
That's awesome. I love that context and just setting everyone, getting everyone on the same page. And I just want to double click into something that I'm super curious about that you mentioned, which is like this period of 20 to 25 direct reports, keeping things as flat as possible. And I think everyone's kind of seen that Jensen, video at NVIDIA where he's got like 60 direct reports, group one-on-ones, like no annual reviews. I was talking to another CEO, bootstrapped to $1 billion company, 19 direct reports. And, I thought, a dozen was a lot.
Yeah.
But I love what you said about this concept of like, well, if everyone's performing, it's actually fine, right? You don't need the weekly one-on-ones and how's it going. But you can kind of really scale out. I'm just kind of curious, like seeing that before, how just so curious about like what you've seen. And is that just like, oh, that's brilliant? Or is that like, man, I would just never do that again. I had to, but I would never again.
I think we got to be careful that to expose any conceit in this argument. Like one of the reasons that Jensen is able to get away with that is because all of those 60 people or whatever are like really senior, like really strong professionals who have kind of made it to that level for a reason, right? So this whole concept of like direct reporting is very different in that model than it might be when you're like, oh, I'm managing a team, let alone managing a team of junior people that are still learning like how to be a professional, right? Like I think I've thought about this a lot. Like I don't think I was actually a professional until I was 28 or 29 years old, right? Like I did a lot of work, but in terms of, once again, whole nother podcast where I was like, man, I'm taking all of this as, seriously in a way, and I understand the context of how it makes a business tick. That took me, 10 years of my career to get a level of understanding. So the conceit is this isn't a one size fits all solution, right? And I think more management, especially that coaching component of management and freeing up that time to do the coaching component is vital, especially when you have, more junior or less skilled or, less multi-tool players along the way. So, our teams at Tanium that were growing to like 2025, et cetera, we had the advantage of hiring, none of them hadn't crossed that professional threshold before even joining us, right? And then the second piece of this, Ian, too, is it's not about the one-on-ones or like this kind of, I always think this antiquated view of like, it's like my relationship with me and my manager, that's the most vital. While I think it's incredibly important and firmly agree that relationship has an incredible effect on how satisfied any person is with their role. When you foster this one team mentality and you're looking, so for any leader, if you're looking at your team and how they communicate and how they're supporting one another, right? You're saying, gee, I might be superfluous to requirements here. I mean, that's the ultimate gift that you can give yourself, right? Like you don't need that top-down direction. You've very deliberately been able to decentralize decision-making and control, right? That enhances the accountability and people with vigor going and attacking these problems, right? When you think about a team and how it's functioning and the way that they're communicating, okay? And you can see this in Mattermost or any, a messaging platform, and emails and that vibe of the tribe, okay? That offloads a lot of that work that we would say traditionally falls on a manager, right? And then the manager, the leader, even better term, gets to say, hey team, here's what I'm concentrating on, right? Like if we're all clear with this direction, we're clear with the intent of this team, and we've solidified the culture of how we're going to act towards this common goal, right? Most people skip over that part, right? They just kind of go like, everybody go do work, and like, we'll check on our TPS reports and status and make sure your shit's in by Thursday, right? Like that model to me is dead. Then you start saying, this isn't really indexed to direct reports, right? This is now how we can build our org charts around where do we need to allocate resources for the good of our customers and their experiences. How are we going to distribute decision-making throughout this organization?
Yeah, totally love that. It's really about the team and the vibe. It's less about like if the manager is, so one, the manager needs to have folks that are sort of like self-managing, and then are they at the right sort of maturity level? And then is the team set up so that they can make decisions sort of independent of the manager? The manager isn't sort of like just making decisions for every single direct report. And if you can, then it feels like you've got a broader number. And if you can't, then you better have a smaller number.
Yeah. I mean, in here, I'll grab like my favorite book, which I always keep on the bookshelf behind me. This is the workbook out of it, but it's Turn the Ship Around. And this was written by a subcaptain, David Marquette, a Navy subcaptain, which has like tons and tons of metrics. And the title of the book comes from the fact that he was on a very high performing sub, and then he got reassigned to a low performing sub, and he increased the performance, the measured performance of that crew through largely cultural shifts, and also affirming that people were in the right roles as well. Furthermore, the extracts from this book, if you want the crash course, and I recommend every leader reads this. I read this book before I was a manager, and it is still, I consider it the most important book that I've read that has shaped my leadership ethos in perpetuity. But one is being clear with intent and creating an intent-based culture. So like if one of my team comes to me and they go, Pete, should I do X? I go, I don't know. Should you? Right? That's the opposite of intent. That's saying top down. I don't want to get in trouble. What's my manager think? Right? I go, I've put you in charge of something. Right? If you want to check down an answer with me, that's fantastic. Right? But say, Pete, I intend to, do X with the customer. Right? A lot of times I go, I concur. This is great. Go do it. Perfect. Or we might reshape that problem. The second is, like just mentioned it, decentralizing decision-making control. So every role should have that impact. People often conflate this with like autonomy, right? Or like when you say, oh, you need self-managing people. I disagree with that a little bit, right? In the sense that people need the support, they need the clarity, they need to understand what's going on, and they need a lot of, to various degrees, coaching, right? Everybody's, myself included, is looking to add new skills and learn new things in life and get recognition for what I'm doing correct, et cetera. And then a third thing is like working out in the open, and we touched on that with how a leader can observe a team, right? Of are you sharing these problems that you're working on, not as a status report, but in like, hey, here's what I'm seeing, here's my intention, right? Here's where I'm going to need help. Like you start seeing those sorts of behaviors there, and people feel that agency, that empowerment, and that accountability very naturally. The need for a top-down manager to go and artificially drive those things completely evaporates. So that's the crash course, Leanna, lessons learned, and I think really gets to some core questions that can influence the correct organizational design.
Completely love it. Pete O, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It was really a pleasure to have you.
Ian, it was great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. If you like this content, please join our LinkedIn group. Please thumbs up, please comment, please subscribe. We'd love to bring more of this content to you.